This last section has to do with agnosias. And agnosias are a deficit in processing. Basically, one of the best illustrations that we could show with agnosias is, and I'll show a little graphic here in a second, is figure 326. There is a cognitive trend among some people, the ability to interpret something. And here is that figure 3.26. I'm going to bump it down just a second here. Come on, babe. In this case, a person that drew these had trouble interpreting what they were and therefore lost the coherence as they were attempting to copy it. So if I know what it is, I can copy it pretty well, but what they were clearly trying to do is just a shape alone without any coherence or appreciation for what it was. So this shows an agnostic patient's rendering of drawings of familiar objects. As you can see, the patient saw the original drawing and his renditions reproduce several details, but what's clear is that he doesn't know what they are. It doesn't recognize the lamp or the iron or the kettle or the anchor. So Rubens and Benson reported on a similar case study in which their agnostic patient could not correctly name any of the objects he saw and drew, saying of a pig that it could be a dog or another animal, and of a bird that it could be a beech stump. So there's lack of interpretation there. So patients suffering from this visual agnosia do not simply have a language problem because they're similarly unable to use nonverbal means of recognizing familiar objects, etc., nor do they have a memory problem because they can tell you what a pig or a key is. So there's no memory problem. Instead, the problem seems to lie in understanding what the visual pattern or object represented to them is. So the deficit seems to be modality. It's a visual agnosia. They can't recognize objects by sight, but they recognize them in other contexts, such as verbally, etc. So there are three different types of agnosias. The first is apperceptive. Patients with this disorder seem able to process a very limited amount of visual information. They can see the contours or outlines of a drawing or an object, but have a difficult time in matching one thing to another. Some cannot name objects at all, and at least one has been reported to be unable to distinguish between X's and O's. Other patients can do this much processing, but have trouble recognizing line drawings when some parts of the outlines are missing, such as the drawing of a chair shown in 327. Do I have that? Oh, let me get to 327 here in a second. So they can't recognize that sort of object, etc. So a second kind of agnosia, I'm on page 68 here, is associative. Patients with this deficit can match objects and drawings, match objects or drawings and copy them, but they tend to do so very slowly and very carefully, almost point by point, instead of using the more typical technique of drawing the big features first and filling in the details. Associative agnostic patients may also become distracted by small details such as an extra dot or a stray line, etc. One last type is prosopagnosia, and that's the inability to recognize faces. That's a very rare one. These people typically suffer from damage to a particular region in the right hemisphere with a little bit of left hemisphere involvement. Now, in this case, this demonstrates a feature of apperceptive agnosia. Excuse me, I'm struggling to pronounce that. Patients with apperceptive agnosia have difficulty recognizing this object as a chair because they can't interpolate the missing contours in A. There are parts that are just missing as though it were a Gestalt drawing, and they can't fill in the blanks. Patients with apperceptive agnosia also have difficulty in recognizing the chair when it's viewed from this unusual angle from the top. We can't rotate it in their minds, etc. So there are three subtle distinctions between these, but it's just a rare situation in which you can draw things competently, but the comparison may not be there between two objects. And it also may be the case that the drawing ability is so limited because you don't have an idea of what you're drawing. You're sort of winging it just by the mere shape of it. And with this notion of apperceptive, as the key word suggests, they're not able to perceive what they're looking at and therefore can't fill in the blanks or rotate it in their minds. Kind of a very unusual disorder, but one that appears occasionally.